but not that narcissistic. Okay, so the title of this class is Developmental Psychology, and in order to get an understanding of what developmental psychology is, we have to know first what is development and then what is psychology. So when you see the term development, what does that mean? Growing. Okay, growing. Okay, growing is part of it. Growing is only a part. It's not the whole thing. Okay? We want to use the word change. Why? Why might the word change be better than the word growth? Because you're changing over time, right? And if we have a flower, our flower grows, but eventually what happens to it? Okay? It's not just going to grow, it's also going to wither and decay and eventually die. That is all a part of the change, and that is all a part of the developmental process. So whenever we see the word development, you need to think that development means change. And it's all of the changes that we experience over time. So if you encounter a question that says, how do you know if something is focused on development? You would say what?
It changes.
Okay? If I say, how do you know if I say to you, this theory, is this a developmental theory? How would you evaluate to see if that was a developmental theory? If it studies change over time. If I say, look at this experiment, is this a developmental experiment? You would know it if what? It studies change over time. Okay? Cool. Within development, there are 3 domains that we are going to focus on. Okay? So in this class, we're studying development, which is change over time, and we're going to study it within 3 domains. Okay? So the first domain that we're going to study is physical development. What are some examples of physical development? Puberty. Okay? That's a change over time. That happens where? In your physical body. Okay? Puberty is change over time, and it's happening in your physical body. Okay? Another domain of development that we're going to study is the cognitive. Yeah. Is the cognitive. Now, why I can't spell that right? Okay? And what is a change over time in the cognitive development? What's an example of a change in cognitive development? Okay, right. So I can probably ask you guys questions that if I asked the same question of a 4-year-old, would they be able to answer it? No. If I was trying to explain that development was change over time to a 2-year-old, they would probably be like, so what? Give me the juice. Okay? Cognitive development. We change and we develop over time in the things that we're able to do with thinking, learning, our language, and things like that. Okay? And the last domain we're going to focus on is the socio-emotional domain of development. Give me an example. Socio-emotional. What do you think this word means? Socio and emotional. Has to do with emotions. Okay, and what else? What's this other word? Okay, right? Our emotions and how we interact with others, right? Have you ever met a person that just didn't know how to make friends? Okay, because that's something that you have to develop over time, right? Have you ever met a 2-year-old that wants something from you and then they hit you and then grab it and take it? Okay, but then they have to change over time, right? And they have to be taught that that's not nice. You know, hit people when you're mad. Okay, like what we teach you when you're 2. You're mad, you have to learn to deal with your emotions. Okay, so these are the 3 domains of development that we're going to be studying. Each chapter is a specific phase of life. And within that chapter and within that phase of life, we are going to look at the physical, cognitive, and social-emotional domains of development that you will encounter in that specific phase of your life. Does that make sense? Prenatal development, birth, infancy, early childhood, middle childhood, adolescence, early adulthood, adulthood, middle adulthood, late adulthood, death and dying. Yeah? So each of those chapters, each of those phases, we're going to look at each of those domains of development. And all of that will be what? Change over time. Yeah? Does all this make sense? See, it's pretty easy. It's not that hard. Okay? When we're talking about development, human development specifically, there are some philosophical issues that are important to understand whenever we're evaluating developmental theories that we're going to talk about. We'll probably get to the developmental theories next time. Okay? But we'll talk about the issues. These are the philosophical issues in development. The first one you may have heard of. The first one is nature versus nurture. Have you guys ever heard of that term? Nature versus nurture. What do you think that means? Somebody says it's in my nature. What does that mean? What are they referring to?
Your instinct.
Their instincts, okay? And that is a part of a person's genetics. Okay? So when we're talking about nature, we're referring to a person's genes or genetics. Okay? When we're talking about nurture, what are we talking about? A person's environment. Very good. Okay? So, if somebody is diagnosed with trisomy 21, which is also known as Down syndrome, is that a product of nature or nurture?
Nature.
Why? Okay, it's a genetic deficiency or a genetic disorder. Okay, so there are some things that we talk about when we're discussing development. When we're talking about development, there are some things that have a genetic foundation or a genetic cause. Okay, there are some things that have an environmental cause. There was a nuclear explosion in China, okay? So let's say you're a pregnant lady walking down the street and you somehow get exposed to that radiation or something like that from that nuclear explosion, and your child has some sort of deficiency, okay? That would be a specific environmental cause for whatever. If your kid has radiation poisoning, or I don't know, whatever it's called, okay? So that would be a disorder that has an environmental cause. If that nuclear reactor would have never blown up, if you would have never been in that environment, you would not experience that disorder. Does that make sense? So in the past, it used to be thought that everything was either nature or nurture. Okay? Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's only your genes. Sometimes it's only your environment. Most times, it's a combination of the two. Most times, you may have a genetic predisposition for something. You put yourself in the correct environment, and then you experience whatever it is. Okay? most times when we're developing, it's a combination of our genes and our environment. Okay? So if you say, somebody says, oh yeah, I have a short temper. It's just like my dad. Okay? Is that genes or environment? So you don't have your dad's genes? Okay? So a lot of times it's both. You have the same genes as your dad, but you also have the same environment as your dad because that's the person who raised you. So you having a short temper is probably a combination of the two. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. The next issue I'm going to talk about is nativism versus empiricism. My spelling is I think that's how it's spelled. You can correct me if I'm wrong. It's in the book. I'm not making any of this up. Okay. Nativism versus empiricism. What do you think that means? Any ideas? Nativism. If something is native, what does that mean if you're a native to something? Born, okay, having to do with from birth. If you are a native of America, you were here from birth, okay? So when you see the term nativism, you can think from birth, okay? You can think innate, like something that's innate. You can Google that word if you don't know what that means, but it's the same. Nativism is from birth, it's innate. As humans, when we are newborns, there are some things that we can do. There are a very short list of things that we can do, but there are some things that we can do. What can a newborn baby do? Suck, cry, poo, pee, sleep. Okay? These are, that one is nativism. Nativism is what you can do without being taught. Okay? Humans, when we're born, we have reflexes. Okay? We're born, we don't have to teach a baby how to cry. They're born knowing how to do that. Don't have to teach them how to suck. They're born knowing how to do that. We don't have to teach them. There are a few other reflexes. Somebody remind me of some more. There's some other ones. Yeah, there's like bowel,
Eat, hunger.
I'm thinking about the ones. There's like the grasping reflex. Like if you put your finger in a newborn's hand, they'll do it. Yeah, with the feet, where they're fanning their feet. So there's a few things that newborns can do. Breathing, right? You don't have to be taught how to breathe. Just like whenever they're born, the pressure in there, they just do it. They just breathe, okay? We don't have to teach those things, okay? So empiricism, what do you think empiricism means?
Something you have to learn.
Yeah, something that you have to be taught. Okay? I have a hound dog, and I taught her how to swim. And how I taught her how to swim was I picked her up and I threw her in the swimming pool.
Oh, no.
Okay? It's an innate thing for dogs. They just, when they get in the water, they know how to do it. But if I wanted to teach a human how to swim, if I wanted to teach your kid if you wanted to teach your kid how to swim, would I pick him up and throw him in the pool? No. That is something that has to be taught in a step-by-step combination. Does anybody know how to swim? Has anybody gotten their kids swimming lessons? You don't just go one time and you know how to do it. Has anybody taught a kid how to ride a bike? Okay, that's what empiricism, these are things that have to be taught. What we're doing in class right now, empiricism, you have to be taught how to be a nurse. Yes, you may be nice and caring and compassionate, but in order to be a RN, you weren't born with it, okay? So you're going to have to be taught some of those skills. So when we're evaluating theories, we're going to determine whether they are nativist or empiricist, okay? Whether they are more nurture or more nature, okay? So make sure you know what these concepts mean. Okay. Is anybody in the book? I forgot the next one just off the top of my head. Yes. Thank you. When we're talking about knowledge, there are active and passive forms of knowledge. Okay? What's an active form of knowledge? Active. If you hear the word active knowledge, what does that mean? You're acting on it, okay? Yeah, so it takes effort, right? You have to participate and put out effort in order to learn that thing. So you guys want to learn how to be nurses. You got to put out effort. You got to put out time. You got to put out money. You got to put out some sort of resources in order to learn what it is you're trying to learn. Okay? What do you think passive is? No effort.
Hardly any.
Okay? Have you ever heard a person that had an accent when they speak? Do you think a person goes out and says, I'm going to go and try to pick up a new accent today? No, it just happens. Because you're around people that speak a certain way, that say their words a certain way, and that is a passive thing. You put in no effort. You picked it up, you learned it, but you put in no effort to do so. Does that make sense? That's probably not going to happen for you in nursing because you have to put up some effort. Okay? Cool. Okay? The next one is continuous versus discontinuous development. So we have continuous and we have discontinuous development. Okay? What do you think continuous development means? Continuous. Huh? Continues to develop. Or in other words, huh? What is it? Yeah. So it would be constant. And it's sort of like it's not obvious. It's constant and it's not obvious. Okay? It's like watching grass grow. Is the grass growing? Yes, it's growing. Can you see it grow? No, not really. If we go outside and say we're watching grass grow, we know it's growing. It's constantly growing. But if we say, did you see it grow? No, not really. But you know it's like your hair, right? It's like you don't wake up and like, ooh, my hair grew 2 inches. Okay, it's continuous and it's not obvious. Discontinuous development is also continuous, but there are obvious changes. Okay, it's noticeable. Okay, it's like a frog. Okay, does a baby frog look like a frog? What does a baby frog look like? It looks like something completely different than a grown-up frog. Okay, that would be discontinuous development. What does a baby butterfly look like? A caterpillar. It looks like something completely different. There is a noticeable, obvious change. It is constantly and continuously developing, but then there's a point where you notice an obvious change. Does that make sense? It's like guys, whenever one day they're talking and they're like, hey, what's going on? And then the next day it's like, hey. Okay? There's a noticeable, obvious change in a person's development. When you have a discontinuous theory of development, you will notice it because it will happen in stages. A continuous theory of development will not have any stages. Keep that in mind. You will need to know that. Okay, and the last thing, this class isn't until 12:05. I have 5 more minutes. So I have one more thing to share with you, and then we'll break. Okay, the last issue that we'll talk about is universalism versus relativism. Universalism versus relativism. When we think about development, think about developmental pathways. Okay, so these focus on pathways of development. Developmental pathways. Okay, universalism is the pathway that is common. Okay, how many of you went to first grade? Then after you went to first grade, you went to second grade. Then after second grade, you went to third grade. Then after third grade, you went to fourth grade, right? That's common pathway of progression through middle school, primary school. Does that make sense? Okay. Are there some people that go from second grade to fourth grade? Okay. So it's a pathway that's more individual. Okay, it's a pathway that deviates from what is common. Does anybody know of a child that learned how to walk that did not ever crawl? There are some kids that do that. Most of us, the most common pathway is you sit up, you stand up, you sit up, you crawl, then you stand up, and then you walk. Okay? Some people skip the crawling and they just go straight to walking. Some people skip grades and they skip the first grade and they go to the second grade. Okay? So this would be the common pathway, and this would be the pathway that is more individual and less common. Does all of this make sense? Keep these notes. You will need them for what we are going to talk about next week. Okay? And I will see y'all next Thursday. Make sure on Tuesday that you turn in, there's 2 things you have to turn in. On Tuesday. The introduction discussion and the orientation quiz. Very good.